Right, so the coefficient of determination as well as everything else after that, which is going to be making predictions using the equation of your line. Now, the coefficient of your determination, and this is just something that I'm going to go through a little bit of because we have noticed that this is something that has popped up in some of the Year 12 exams. So we just want to go through it with you guys as well. Now, you guys know what the R value is. Yeah, so that R value basically describes the strength and the direction. So if it's a positive number, it's going up. Okay, and if it's a negative number, it's going to go down. And the decimal number, which is the indicator of the strength, is either between -1 and +1. So if we look back at this chapter here, that's what we did in 7E and 7D. Okay, understanding that R value. Where is it? This one, this guy here. Okay, remember what it stands for. Okay, it just basically describes the direction of the graph and the strength of it. Now, the R squared is a little bit different. Okay, I remember we did see an R squared value here. They're not exactly the same. Okay, they're slightly different. They don't necessarily, they don't mean totally different things. Okay, but there are different ways of interpreting and what's the difference between them. Okay, they're slightly different, but they still sort of relate to the direction and the form of the graph. So, okay, here we go. So the coefficient of determination. Okay, so it's a slightly different name as well. The coefficient correlation is the R value. Okay, so I should write that here, or you should write it here. So the correlation coefficient, okay, is the R value. Okay, understand that. Correlation coefficient is the R value, but the coefficient of the determination is slightly different in that it's the R squared value. So realize that there's a difference between the two. One is correlation coefficient, the other is coefficient of determination. Okay, they're slightly different. So the coefficient of determination is represented by R squared. Now, if I told you guys this is the R value, and R squared is the R squared value, which is the coefficient of determination, how do you guys think you get the R squared value from an R value? So if you have an R value, okay, and you have the R squared value, how do you get the R squared value based on the R value? You square it. That's literally it. How do you get the coefficient of determination? You just square the R value. It's really easy, okay? But the meaning of it is slightly different. So the reason why we have this coefficient of determination is because it's a representation of how good the least squares regression equation is in predicting the RV from the EV. Now, that's a lot of mumbo jumbo, but all it's saying is the value of the R squared determines how good the equation is in representing the data. Okay, it's basically that, just how good the data is at representing the data, or how good the line is at actually representing that data. So in terms of interpreting it and finding it, it's really straightforward. First, to get the R squared value, you just have to square the R value. I should write that here. Okay. R squared is equal to square the R value. Okay, that's really easy. That's how you get the R squared value. So let's say, for example, I'm going to use these ones as an example. Where is it? So far. Okay. Let's say you have these values here, and I want to find the R squared of it. Okay. So to find the R squared of it, okay, just go to the calculator. Let's say my R value is negative 0.4. So it's going to be negative 0.4. The important thing is sometimes you might need to put a bracket around this, or else your calculator won't recognize it as a negative number. Squared. And there's your answer, 0.16. Okay, so the R squared value is 0.16. Let's try negative 0.84. Okay, so negative bracket negative 0.84. Okay, squared will be 0.7056. Okay, that's how you find your R squared value. Alternatively as well, on your calculator, okay, if you've done it properly, if you have a look, we've seen this before, you've got your R value, but you've also got your R squared value there. Okay, so that's how we calculate the R squared value. So if you have a graph, right, if you've got your numbers, okay, you put it in your calculator.
If the R is negative, then the R squared would be more than the R. But if the R is positive and it's decimal, the R squared would be less. That's why it's 0.8 and 0.7.
Yeah, essentially. But also, if it's a negative R, your R squared is going to be positive because you're multiplying two negatives together. Yep. So good observation, Fahad. So you can actually just find it on your calculator as well like this. So you don't have to physically calculate it, although sometimes you'll get a question where it gives you the R value and you just got to calculate the R squared. Okay, so that's how you do it on your calculator. So, but now that we have our R squared, what do we do with it? We need to interpret it. Okay, you know how to interpret your R value. You got to tell me the strength, the form, and the direction. When it comes to the R squared value, okay, it's pretty straightforward. All you're doing, okay, this looks a bit crazy, but basically you're finding the R squared, turning it into a percentage, okay, and then you're writing this, basically this whole sentence is what you're writing, this whole thing. But the only things that you got to change are, what's the R squared, okay, what's the RV, and what's the EV. That's it. Okay, that's how you interpret it. So let's actually try these as an example. All right, 7E. Let's try the, E. Okay, a least squares regression line is performed to predict the amount of carbon monoxide in the air from the amount of traffic. Okay, so this is telling me that carbon monoxide is going to be the RV, okay, and the amount of traffic is going to be the EV, because the EV determines how much carbon monoxide there's going to be. Okay, so let's actually make a point of that first. Here is the amount of traffic is going to be EV. So make sure you understand that. And then amount of carbon monoxide in the air is going to be your RV. I'll use different color. Okay, that's our RV. Okay, you just got to understand which one is which always. In any question, which is EV, which is RV. Okay, the R value, so the correlation coefficient right here is 0.985. So this is your R value. Not an R squared, yeah, just the R value right there. So we need to find the coefficient of determination and interpret that value. So if my R value, so let's start with that, is equal to 0.985, my R squared value would be, okay, grab your calculator, put it in. Okay, so you've got 0.985 squared. That would be 0.970. Let me just double check it, rounded it properly. Yeah, we'll do 3 sig figs. Yeah, it doesn't say how many significant figures. Let's just do the 3. Now we need to interpret this. But before we do, we just need to convert it into a percentage. So remember, to convert a decimal to a percentage, okay, just multiply it by 100. Okay, so it's going to be 0.970 times 100. Okay, which equals 97.0%. And now we interpret it. All right, so I'm just basically following what it tells me here. Turn it into a percentage, and now we interpret it. So we say 97.0%, sorry.
Wait, do you have to add 0.0?
Well, it doesn't say that it wants 3 sig figs, but I'm just going to make it 3 sig figs.
So if it said 3 sig figs and you don't add 0,
it would be incorrect.
You would lose mark.
Yes. In year 12, yes, that's what they do. So it's very strict. Okay, 97.0%. So just follow the sentence of the variation. Okay, so what's the response variable? Have a look. Carbon monoxide, amount of carbon monoxide. So I'll put that in. Amount of carbon monoxide. Monoxide in the air Okay. And then continuing on, is explained by the variation in, and then tell me what the EV is. Okay. So the EV we determined was amount of traffic. And that's essentially how you interpret your R squared value. Okay. So you're just telling me what's the actual R squared, but as a percentage, what's the RV, and then what's the EV. Those are the three things you've got to change in that sentence. Right? It's pretty straightforward. All right. Do I need to do one more, or you guys get it? One more?
Get it.
All right. If you get it, maybe for some that don't, that's okay. Let's do F real quick. Okay. Again, look at the question, understand what's EV, what's RV. At least goes regression line. Okay. Predict the height. So if you're trying to predict the height, okay, this is most likely going to be your RV, because you want to figure out what the height is based on their height of their biological mother. Okay, so this is going to be the EV, because RV you want to figure out based on the EV, which is going to be whatever this is, biological height of their mother. All right, we have a R value there. So my R value is 0.873. Okay, 0.873. Cool. What's my R squared value? Okay, so it's going to be that squared. So 0.873 squared. And you get 0.762. Okay, now you got to turn it to a percentage, yeah? So make it a percentage, which will be 0.762 times 100, which means it's 76.2%. Now we interpret it. So interpreting it is going to be 76.2% of the variation.
Right, so if it doesn't say how many things, or if it doesn't tell you this rounded to 2 decimals, and it's like this, would you round it to 2 decimals, or would you put it to 3 sig?
I would go with 3 sig figs, because that's normally what I've seen in most SACs and CFATs before, in year 12 at least, just to be safe. Okay. And then write down your EV and your RV. So my RV here was height. In height is going to be your RV. Can be explained by, is explained by the variation in, and then tell me your EV. And my EV was height of their biological mother. Okay. So that's basically how you interpret that R squared value. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Just use that sentence that I've highlighted here and just change those variables. So you're changing the R squared as a percentage, tell me the RV, and then tell me the EV. Okay, those are the three things you change. All right, let's move on to the next part, and then you guys can start working on 7G. All right, let me just have a look at how long this is. Okay, easy. This won't be long. All right, so that's how you interpret. There's going to be times where it asks you interpret the R value, interpret the R squared value. I wish they actually put that together instead of separate, but that's okay. I'm just going to stop.